June 17th, 2010 will always be remembered for the Upper Midwest tornado outbreak. There were 74 tornadoes reported that day across the Upper Midwest, and 4 of those tornadoes were violent EF4 tornadoes. 3 of these occurred in Minnesota and 1 in eastern North Dakota. Of those 4 violent tornadoes, 1 occurred near Holmes, North Dakota, 2 near Wadena, Minnesota, and the last west of Albert Lea, Minnesota. In my travels across the region that year, I passed through each of these violent tornado tracks. At Holmes, North Dakota, I saw where the tornado had torn up a shelter belt. Large cottonwood trees were shredded and whirled around. Farm equipment was tossed into fields, and a farmhouse was leveled to the ground. Later that summer, as I was traveling eastward along Interstate 90 in southern Minnesota, I inadvertently came across the damage path from the EF4 tornado that had occurred west of Albert Lea. Intrigued, I pulled off the interstate and followed the damage path. This led me to a barn that captivated me because its color was so unique and because I love old clay tile barns. I had never seen a golden-looking clay tile barn before. This led me to the story of the man who had built this barn nearly 100 years ago, Dr. Hiram Burns. Hiram Burns was born March 20th, 1889, in Litchfield, Minnesota. Litchfield is west of the Twin Cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul, in central Meeker County. Hiram was the son of William and Alice Burns, who were married in Meeker County in 1885. His mother Alice was the first non-native child born in Meeker County. His brother, William D., was born 4 years after Hiram. Both brothers would go on to become doctors. Hiram moved to Albert Lea, Minnesota in 1915 to partner with Dr. Stevenson. If you remember, Albert Lea is in south-central Minnesota in Freeborn County. This is a photo of Dr. Burns from around 1924. Dr. Burns married Corinne Searle in 1915 in Omaha, Nebraska. Several years later, the couple purchased a fancy home on Fountain Lake in Albert Lea. This old postcard shows several old fancy homes along the west shore of Fountain Lake. Dr. Hiram Burns also purchased several parcels of land to the west of Albert Lea, one in Manchester Township and one in Pickerel Lake Township. He named his farms the Burnsmore Farms. Let's look first at the farm in Manchester Township. This farm was located in portions of sections 30, 31, and 32. Hiram's brother William owned several parcels of land adjacent to Hiram for his summer getaway spot. However, we are going to focus on the northeast quarter of section 31 that Hiram owned. Hiram's other parcel of land was located in Pickerel Lake Township. This farm was located primarily in the southeast quarter of section 28. Since the brothers did not live on these farms, they each hired families to live on and run their farms. Hiram first hired Emery J. Baldwin and his wife Ruth to run his farm from 1928 to 1933. After the Baldwins, Hiram selected Edwin F. Marp and his wife Helen to run the farm. The Marps would run the farm for many years. Hiram was extremely interested in dairy farming and turned both his farms into dairy farms. He wanted valuable blooded Guernsey cows on his farms, so he purchased Xmas May King number 66811 as the bull for his herd. Guernsey cows were a white and golden brown color. Dr. Burns was very proud of his Guernsey herd and took them on the show circuit for a number of years. In 1926, that included the Minnesota State Fair, the South Dakota State Fair, and the North Iowa State Fair. His dairy cows did very well, racking up a number of blue ribbons. Hiram's son Robert grew up working on the Burnsmore farms and also traveled with the herd to the various fairs. This is a photo of Bob with 96 ribbons, won at 5 fairs in 1940. Hiram's daughter, Catherine, also went on to become a doctor. Along with his farms, Hiram built a dairy in Albert Lea in 1932. This was called the Burnsmore Dairy, and it sold his Golden Guernsey products. The Burnsmore Dairy was one of the most up-to-date and modern plants in Minnesota. Not long after, the dairy purchased a Studebaker Rockney truck for deliveries. The Burnsmore Dairy advertised its products extensively in the local newspapers and became very well known. Dr. Burns also bred and sold pigs on his farms, as this auction advertisement showed. However, his Guernsey herd was his prized possession. If you remember, one of the Burns farms was located in the northeast quarter of Section 31 in Manchester Township. This is an aerial photo of the farm from 1938. 1938 was the year that Dr. Burns built a clay tile, block barn, and milk house at that farm. Hiram selected a tile color that would represent his Golden Guernsey brand, which was a golden color. The Vincent Clay Products Company of Fort Dodge, Iowa, was well known for its golden glaze tile. This golden colored tile was the perfect match for Dr. Burns's Golden Guernsey brand. Of course, a beautiful brick makes a beautiful building. Albert Lea and Manchester Township were connected by the Minneapolis and St. Louis Railway, so the block could be easily transported. The Vincent Clay Products Company was formed in 1911 with Webb and Leon Vincent. However, one of Webb's sons, Harry S., was the president of the company for a long time. Can you imagine what it was like to build a barn in 1938? The Great Depression and the Dust Bowl years lasted from 1929 to 1939, so this would have been toward the end of those years. Andrew J. Hansen, a brick mason living in Manchester Township, was selected to build Dr. Burns's new barn. The golden glazed tile mainly covered the lower level of the barn, so a carpentry crew had to enclose it. James W. Bowen, a carpenter from Freeborn, Minnesota, and his crew built the roof on the new barn. This would have been an expensive and difficult job to complete, but the results were eye-popping. This was a beautiful new barn with a very unique color scheme. Dr. Burns did not get to enjoy his new barn very long, as he died unexpectedly in 1940 while visiting his other farm in Pickerel Lake Township. After that point, Hiram's wife, Corin, took over the ownership of both farms and the dairy business. As mentioned before, Edwin F. Marp and his wife Helen lived on the farm. They remained caretakers for 23 years before moving off the farm in 1956. At that point, they held an auction to sell the Marp and Burns farm. Robert Bryson then became the owner of the northeast quarter of Section 31, Manchester Township. Guy Robert Bryson was born in Albert Lea in 1928, the son of Lawrence and Huldah Bryson. Robert and his brothers grew up on the family farm, raising all kinds of animals. Robert married Dolores Spain in 1953, and the couple lived on the farm. The Brysons specialized in raising and selling Hampshire pigs, which were uniquely colored black and white. The Brysons were proud of their livestock and showed them in the Minnesota State Fair for 57 straight years, beginning in 1953. I met Robert by chance in August of 2010, as I tracked the tornado path I mentioned before, west of Albert Lea. As I drove along this tornado track, I came across this beautiful golden glaze tile barn. Fascinated, I pulled into the driveway, where a barking dog came running out at me. As I pulled into the farmyard, Robert came out of the house and met me. I asked him about the barn and its unique color, and about the tornado. He was proud of his barn and showed me the treasure he had inside it. A mama Hampshire pig with piglets. It was easy to see Robert's attachment to his animals, including his dog and cats. This is a Google Earth image of the farmstead from 2011. Knowing what a rare barn it was, I returned several years later and received his permission to video the barn. Come along for a little tour. In concluding, I was saddened to learn that Robert passed away in 2021. The barn continues to stand, but is in very rough shape. That concludes the video. Make sure to check out my other YouTube videos and my primary website at mnbricks.com.